At my son's 11th birthday party, my sister Kristen smashed his face into the cake. Even though I had warned her multiple times not to pull that stunt, what happened next changed our family forever. My 78-year-old grandmother stood up and did something no one in the family dared to do. She taught us all a lesson about respect in a way we would never forget. Let me tell you what happened next. Hello, everyone. I'm Mirabelle. I'm 34 years old and a mechanical engineer living in Austin, Texas. The story I'm about to tell you happened exactly 1 year ago, and even now, I still can't believe a birthday cake could break a family apart, and that a 78-year-old woman would be the one to teach us all a lesson about respect. Before I get into the main story, let me introduce my family. My husband, Mark, is 35 and works in marketing. He has a gentle personality but evident principles, especially regarding our son. Jaden, our 11-year-old boy, is pretty introverted and sensitive. Instead of running outside like other kids, he enjoys reading and building complex Lego castles in his room. My sister Kristen is 25 and works in marketing for a startup. Kristen is the kind of person who's overly confident and always thinks she's the center of every party, and that's the issue. She's been ridiculously spoiled since childhood. My dad, Larry, is retired from an insurance company. He's very traditional, but unquestioningly favors his daughter. Kristen was born prematurely, and he's always felt guilty about it. So he spent her whole life making excuses for her. Whenever someone complains about Kristen's behavior, he immediately says, "Kristen just wants everyone to have fun." My mom, Brenda, works part-time at the library. She's gentle but tends to avoid conflict. Whenever there's tension in the family, she tells me, "I know Kristen's wrong, but your dad keeps defending her." That only made everything worse over time. And finally, my grandmother Cynthia is 78 years old. She was a carpenter for 40 years, lives independently, and has a very clear moral compass. She once told me, "Sweetheart, sometimes you need a hammer instead of words." At the time, I laughed and thought it was just one of her sayings. I never imagined she meant to use that hammer. To better understand our family situation, I need to tell you about something that happened 6 months earlier. It was during a family barbecue for my birthday. Everything was going normally until it was time to cut the cake. As I leaned down to blow out the candles, Kristen suddenly rushed in from behind and shoved my face straight into the chocolate cake. Frosting and cake got all over my face while my sister giggled like it was the funniest joke in the world. Right after I wiped my face clean, I saw Jaden standing a few feet away, his eyes wide with fear. That night, while Mark was bathing him, Jaden suddenly turned to him and said, "I don't want Aunt Kristen to do that to me." When Mark told me what he had said, my chest tightened. That same night, I called Kristen. When she picked up, I said bluntly, "I hope you try that on my kid." But instead of apologizing, Kristen laughed and replied, "You're making such a big deal out of this. It was just a joke." Then she hung up. At that point, I thought I had settled things with Kristen. I believe my sister had understood the boundary I was setting. I was utterly wrong. 1 month after that phone call, Jaden's 11th birthday arrived. We decided to hold the party at my parents' house because they had a big backyard and a pool, perfect for a kid's party. Jaden had picked out his cake 3 weeks in advance. He spent hours browsing the internet, looking through hundreds of cake designs before finally choosing this one. It was the cake he'd been dreaming of all year, a chocolate castle with frosting towers and tiny flags placed on top. Mark spent the entire week helping prepare for the party. He decorated the whole yard with a night theme using blue and silver banners and cardboard shields, and even rented a full night costume for Jaden. He also invited 8 of our son's closest friends, the kids he truly connected with from school and his Lego class. On the morning of his birthday, while Mark was busy finishing the food, Jaden came to find me in the garage. He stood quietly next to the car, then looked up at me worriedly and asked, "Mom, Aunt Kristen won't do anything to my cake, right?" Hearing that question made my heart ache. I knelt to his level and reassured him. "I already talked to her. Today is your day." I didn't tell Mark that all week I had noticed Jaden standing in front of the bathroom mirror, practicing how to blow out his candles. He would take a deep breath, close his eyes, and whisper the special wish he'd been saving for this day. The party started perfectly. All 8 of Jaden's friends arrived by 2 p.m., each one excited by the night castle decorations Mark had put together. The kids ran around the yard, played treasure hunt, and couldn't stop admiring Jaden's night costume. Laughter filled the air. Everything was going great until Kristen showed up. At 2:45, my sister's red Honda Civic pulled up in front of the house. Kristen stepped out wearing a neon pink crop top, ripped denim shorts, and tall boots. She wanted to be the center of attention, even at a kid's birthday party. When she shut the car door, Kristen raised both arms and shouted, "Is my little man ready for his surprise?" Hearing that, Mark shot me a warning glance. I understood him immediately and walked quickly toward my sister. I leaned in and whispered to Kristen as I got closer, "Do you remember what I told you?" Right away, Kristen waved her hand casually and replied, "You worry too much. I just want to say happy birthday." After her response, I nodded and decided to watch her closely for the rest of the party. 1 hour later, the cake cutting was the most crucial part of the party. Mark brought out the beautiful chocolate castle cake and placed it on the decorated table in the yard. 8 kids gathered around Jaden, their eyes lighting up as they saw the sugary masterpiece. Jaden stood before the cake, his face glowing with the happiest smile I had ever seen. Mark lit 11 candles, and all his friends started singing, "Happy birthday to you." The voices of the 8 kids blended into the sweetest chorus. Jaden closed his eyes, ready to make the special wish he had been practicing all week. Just as Jaden took a deep breath to blow out the candles, I saw a flash of pink rushing in from behind. Before I could react, Kristen had charged forward and shoved Jaden's face straight into the castle cake. The sound of his face hitting the cake echoed through the air. Chocolate frosting and whipped cream flew everywhere. But worse, one of the candles still burned, touching Jaden's left cheek, leaving a minor burn. The horrific scene froze everyone in place. All 8 of Jaden's friends stood in shock. The 2 youngest, Emma and Tyler, burst into tears out of fear. They had never seen an adult do something so terrifying to another kid. The joyful atmosphere of the party instantly turned into a heavy, stunned silence. Jaden stood frozen like a statue for 5 long seconds. Chocolate frosting dripped from his hair down his face, and cake crumbs clung to his night costume. Then he burst into tears. Immediately, Mark rushed over and wrapped him in his arms, his voice shaking as he whispered, "It's okay, buddy. I'm here." As for me, I stood completely stunned. A few seconds later, I asked Kristen, "What the hell did you just do?" Instead of showing any sign of remorse, Kristen gave a nervous laugh and said, "It was just a joke. I do it to everyone." Hearing that, I stepped closer to my sister and said firmly, "I told you never to do that to my son." As soon as those words left my mouth, my father stood up from his chair and raised his voice. "Don't talk to your sister like that." Meanwhile, my mother quietly turned to Kristen and said, "You should apologize to Jaden." The chaos of the moment left Jaden's 8 friends completely shaken. Marcus came over and hugged Jaden, his voice full of concern. "Are you okay?" A little girl named Emma stood a few steps away, staring at Kristen and saying, "She's mean." Parents who had come to pick up their kids started arriving and witnessed the entire scene. They exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to step in. Some of them began whispering to each other, clearly uncomfortable with what had just happened. No one cared about the ruined castle cake or the unopened presents anymore. The birthday party had turned into a disaster, and all I could think about was how to protect my son from further pain. Jaden still trembled in Mark's arms, tears mixing with chocolate frosting on his little face. This was not the birthday he had dreamed of. Grandma stood up from her chair in the middle of all the tension. Her voice was low and steady as she said, "Everyone listen to me." The moment she spoke, the entire yard fell silent. I noticed the kids looking at her with curiosity and nervousness. A few seconds later, she looked directly at Kristen and asked, "You were clearly warned. Why did you still do it?" Now visibly uneasy, Kristen stammered, "Grandma, I just wanted everyone to have fun." But Grandma cut her off. She said, "Is Jaden having fun? Look at his face." I saw Kristen begin to tremble slightly. She wasn't used to being confronted like this. Meanwhile, Jaden was still crying in Mark's arms, his face covered in chocolate frosting and tears. Then Grandma turned to my father with a firm gaze and asked, "Son, do you see your grandson crying?" Immediately, my dad cut in with a harsh tone, "Don't tell me how to raise my grandkid. Whoever's child it is, that's who should discipline them." After that response, Grandma stared at my father in silence. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Even the kids could feel the tension thickening in the air. I saw my mom lower her head, avoiding everyone's eyes. The other parents stood frozen, unsure whether to leave or stay. In the stillness of the party, I could hear Jaden's sobbing breaths and the wind brushing through the leaves in the yard. Grandma kept her eyes locked on my father's face, as if she was reevaluating everything she thought she knew about him. Finally, she said only this, "All right, I understand." The way she said it sent a chill down my spine. Not out of anger, but because there was something deeper, something final and resolute in her tone. Meanwhile, Mark held Jaden tightly, looked at me meaningfully, then whispered to Hamaim, "Let's go home, sweetheart." I knew right then that my husband had had enough. The birthday party had ended in the worst way possible. After deciding it was time to leave, I grabbed our jackets, turned to Kristen, and said, "You need to think about what you did." Instead of reflecting, Kristen snapped back immediately, "You're blowing this way out of proportion. It was just a joke." That was when a painful realization hit me. No one in my parents' family tried to stop us from leaving. There were no apologies, no attempts to make things right. They just stood there and watched us go, as if we were in the wrong. Grandma also stood up. She looked at my father once more with eyes full of disappointment and said, "Goodbye." She said it like a final farewell, not just a casual goodbye. Something in our family had shifted, something that couldn't be undone. And we weren't the only ones. 3 other families quietly gathered their kids and left early as well. They didn't explain, just silently packed up their children's things and walked out. I saw them glance at each other with uneasy expressions, clearly not wanting their kids to stay in that environment. After we and the others had gone, I overheard my father mutter, "Those people are ridiculous," blowing a small thing out of proportion. Hearing that from outside, a deep sadness welled up inside me. He still didn't understand why everyone had reacted the way they did. Kristen sat quietly on a chair, staring down at her hands, which were still smeared with chocolate frosting. For the first time, she looked genuinely confused. Maybe she was finally realizing that no one had laughed at her joke. My mom sighed and cleaned up the cake crumbs scattered across the table. Her voice was low and tired as she said, "This birthday was such a shame." As we drove home, Jaden remained utterly silent. Mark sat in the back seat, holding him gently and wiping away the last bits of frosting from his face. No one said a word the entire ride. The house that had once felt like the warmth of my childhood now felt like a stranger's home. When we got home, Jaden refused to eat dinner. He just wanted to lie in his room. He climbed into bed, pulled the blanket over his head, and didn't want to talk to anyone. Mark went upstairs to help him change clothes. As he gently wiped off the last bits of frosting, he noticed a slight burn from the candle on Jaden's left cheek. It wasn't large, but it had damaged his skin. "We need to call the doctor to have it checked," Mark told me, his voice full of worry while he carefully bandaged the minor wound. Jaden suddenly looked up at his dad with red, puffy eyes and asked, "Dad, why does Aunt Kristen hate me?" That question stopped Mark in his tracks. He didn't know how to explain an adult's behavior in a way an 11-year-old could understand. Ultimately, he pulled Jaden close and held him tight, unable to say a word. I stood in the doorway, watching my husband and son, and felt my heart shatter. How could I explain that Aunt Kristen didn't hate him, that she had never learned to respect others? Around 9 p.m., when Jaden was finally resting quietly in his room, his phone rang. It was Marcus calling. I overheard his friend's voice coming through the speaker. "We think your aunt is mean." Hearing that made me feel deeply ashamed. 11-year-old kids could see the truth more clearly than the adults in my family. After Jaden fell asleep, I called Grandma. When she picked up, I said, "Thank you for speaking up." She stayed silent for a moment, then replied firmly, "Sweetheart, I'm not done yet." The way she said it sent a chill down my spine. I knew Grandma wasn't the kind of person to say something unless she meant it. If she said she was going to do something, she would. That night, I lay in bed next to Mark, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had been protecting my son. Maybe it was time to start making some hard decisions to protect the family that truly mattered. The next morning, at 5:00 a.m., Grandma came to my house, knocked on the door, and told me to get up and come with her to my parents' place. She said she had something to do. I had no idea what she was planning, so I quietly got dressed and followed her. At precisely 6:00 a.m., heavy knocking echoed from my parents' front door. Grandma stood outside, pounding on it until someone finally opened up. My mom opened the door, startled to see Grandma dressed in her old work clothes, a flannel shirt and rugged jeans she used to wear back when she was a carpenter. What stood out most was the large leather bag she carried. It looked heavy. Without any greetings, she told my mother, "Get everyone downstairs. I have something to say." 10 minutes later, the whole family gathered in the living room. My father sat on the sofa with a scowl, clearly annoyed about being woken up so early. Kristen came downstairs in pink pajamas, her hair a mess and her eyes swollen from sleep. Grandma stood in the middle of the room, looked around, and said clearly, "This is your last chance. Kristen needs to apologize to Jaden in front of the whole family." As soon as Grandma said it, Kristen shook her head. She answered, "I don't think I did anything wrong. It was just a joke." Upon hearing that, Grandma turned to my father with a cold stare and said, "Enabling wrong behavior has consequences." My father gave a dry chuckle, clearly dismissive. He told her, "You do whatever you want. I'm not afraid." Grandma looked at him for a few more seconds, then calmly repeated her familiar line. "All right, I've said enough." The way she said it made the air in the room feel thick and heavy. My mom seemed to sense the moment's seriousness and whispered to my father, "You should listen to her." But he stayed stubborn. He waved his hand dismissively and muttered, "She's old. What can she even do?" Grandma didn't flinch. She didn't respond with anger. She bent down, picked up the heavy leather bag, stood tall, and looked my father straight in the eye. In that moment, I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before. A calm, icy resolve built from a lifetime of having to protect herself. Kristen started to look uneasy. She glanced around the room, almost searching for support, but all she met was silence. Even my father seemed a little uncomfortable under Grandma's gaze. Grandma looked at Kristen one last time and asked, "You don't want to apologize?" Despite the fear flickering in her eyes, Kristen still shook her head and said, "I didn't do anything wrong." Grandma nodded as if she had expected that answer all along. She took hold of her leather bag, turned toward the door, and paused briefly before leaving. Then she said calmly, "I know what I have to do." After she left, the room fell into complete silence. Kristen looked at my father with worried eyes, as if for the first time she realized that there were consequences, even if he couldn't protect her from them. After Grandma and I left the house, a thunderous crashing sound rang out from my parents' front yard. The sound of shattering glass jolted the entire neighborhood awake. Grandma stood next to my dad's red 1995 Mustang holding an old wooden baseball bat, the same one I used to play with as a kid. She had just smashed the front windshield, and glass shards were scattered across the driveway. My dad came sprinting from the house in his sleep shorts, barefoot, yelling, "Are you out of your mind? That's a classic car." That Mustang was his pride and joy. He had spent 3 years restoring it from a scrap pile into a flawless vintage machine. On weekends, he would sit beside it for hours, polishing every little detail with a craftsman's care. Grandma didn't respond. She raised the bat again, struck the front headlight, and then the side mirror. Each hit exploded into another blast of broken glass, echoing like fireworks in the stillness of early morning. At least 5 neighbors had come out by then. They stood at their gates staring in stunned silence. Mr. Thompson from next door even pulled out his phone and started recording. He thought this was something worth documenting. At that moment, I felt humiliated knowing the whole neighborhood would discuss our family, but at the same time, something else stirred inside me, a strange, fierce sense of relief, like someone had finally done what I never dared to do. After the last blow, Grandma stood up straight, looked my father dead in the eye, and said clearly, "I'm going to teach you a lesson." The words hit my father like a lightning bolt. Then she asked, her voice cold, "You want to know what it feels like to watch something you love get destroyed?" Kristen came running out of the house, her face still marked by a pillow crease, crying hysterically. Through the tears, she shouted at Grandma, "What are you doing? That's my dad's car." Her sobbing sounded desperate. Maybe for the first time in her life, Kristen realized that her actions could lead to consequences she couldn't control. My mother stood silently in the doorway, holding my father's hand, saying nothing. Her face was lined with quiet sorrow, like she had seen this moment coming, but had no power to stop it. She stood there, watching the wreckage of the car and her daughter's tears. My dad stood frozen, staring at the car he had poured 3 years of effort into. His eyes were red, not from rage, but from something more profound, a kind of grief, not just for the car, but for what had been shattered inside him. Grandma looked around one last time, then turned and silently walked away. She left the baseball bat beside the destroyed car like a message. This is what happens when you don't learn respect. As she and I walked away, the neighborhood remained silent, watching her go. I knew the story would be talked about for weeks, but I also knew Grandma had done what needed to be done. That morning, the video of Grandma smashing my dad's car spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. It was posted in the local Facebook group titled, "78-Year-Old Grandma Teaches Her Son a Lesson." Within hours, it had hundreds of views and comments. Kristen's coworkers started asking about her famous grandma. After someone recognized her in the video, she sat at her desk, her face flushed with embarrassment as she tried to explain why her grandmother had taken a baseball bat to her dad's car. My dad, furious, called the police, but he hesitated when the officers asked if he wanted to file an official report. He knew doing so would only worsen the situation, especially with the video spreading everywhere. Ultimately, he told the officers, "We'll handle it within the family." Later that morning, I called my dad to check on him during my lunch break. As soon as he answered, I began, "Are you okay? I heard about—" He cut me off before I could finish. He shouted, "Your grandma's lost her damn mind. She humiliated this whole family." Hearing him say that stirred something conflicted inside me. On one hand, I understood the pain of watching something you love be destroyed. But on the other hand, I knew Grandma had done what I didn't have the guts to do: stand up for my son. Things weren't any better around the neighborhood. 3 families who used to be close to my parents now avoid talking to them altogether. When my dad went out to get the mail, they'd nod politely and quickly head back inside. The distance and silence left him feeling isolated in the neighborhood he had lived in for over 20 years. Kristen came home from a long and humiliating day at work and for the first time started to show real fear. She asked my mom, shaky, "What's Grandma going to do next?" For the first time, my mother didn't protect her daughter. She replied, "Honestly, she warned you and you didn't listen." Those words hit Kristen like a slap. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she realized that not even her mother was standing by her side anymore. For once, Kristen felt truly alone and scared of what might come next. When my mom told me what had happened that day in their house, I hoped this would finally be the lesson they needed, the one that might change something. 3 days later, attorney Abraham Miller arrived at Grandma's house. Mr. Miller had been the family lawyer for over 20 years, a serious man in a gray suit, always carrying the same old leather briefcase. My parents were invited to hear an update on the will. That phone call from the lawyer made everyone uneasy. No one knew what was coming, but they all had a bad feeling after what had happened 3 days earlier. The living room felt heavier than ever. Mr. Miller sat at the center table with a stack of legal documents. Grandma sat in her familiar armchair, resting her chin on one hand, eyes locked onto each person in the room. My father sat beside my mother on the sofa, trying to appear calm, though his nervousness was apparent. Kristen sat in the corner, her eyes red from a long, tense day. Mr. Miller opened the folder and read aloud. "At the request of Mrs. Cynthia Miller, we are proceeding with an update to her will." At that moment, Grandma stood and announced, "I am removing Larry from the will, including all rights to this house." It hit my father like a lightning strike. That house was worth $400,000, and he had always counted on inheriting it to guarantee stability in retirement. He once told my mom, "At least we'll never have to worry about where we'll live." After a few seconds of stunned silence, Grandma continued, "If Kristen does not apologize to Jaden within 7 days, she will also be removed from the will." Mr. Miller continued reading the revised section. "Assets will be distributed as follows. Brenda receives 30%, Mirabelle 30%, Mark and Jaden each receive 20%. My father slammed his hand on the table, his voice trembling angrily as he shouted, "You can't do this. I took care of you all these years." Grandma looked him straight in the eye and replied calmly, "You took care of me, but you failed to teach your daughter to respect others." Kristen broke down in tears. She realized that not just her family, but her financial future was now on the line. She had never imagined that what she did at a birthday party could lead to consequences this serious. My mother sat silently, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. Her mother-in-law's decision shook her, but deep down she knew this was the inevitable outcome of years spent protecting Kristen from accountability. The room grew suffocatingly tense. Everyone now understood Grandma wasn't bluffing. She was fully prepared to rewrite her legacy, to defend her principles. After hearing the terms of the new will, my father shot up from his seat, his face flushed with rage. He stormed out mid-meeting and slammed the door so hard, the sound echoed through the entire house. The way he left made it painfully clear. He felt powerless and defeated by his mother's decision. Kristen sat crying uncontrollably, but even through her tears, she still insisted, "I didn't do anything wrong." Hearing that filled me with a profound disappointment. Even with her inheritance on the line, my sister still refused to admit she had done anything wrong. What shocked me most was my mother's reaction. She stood up, signed the acknowledgement of the updated will, and said with quiet resolve, You did the right thing." In that moment, I realized she had endured my father's blind defense of Kristen for far too long. She was finally allowed to voice what she had kept buried for years. After everything that had happened, I silently held Mark's hand and said, "All I ever wanted was for Jaden to be treated with respect." What surprised me next was Jaden's reaction. When he heard the lawyer read his name in the will, he gave a slight, thoughtful nod, like he understood the weight of what it meant. Mr. Miller added, "Jaden's portion will be held in trust and managed by Mirabel until he turns 18. After the lawyer and everyone else had left, Grandma pulled me aside and said, "Sweetheart, I didn't do this for the money." I understood exactly what she meant. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about teaching the family a lesson: respect and accountability. At that point, Kristen began to grasp the real consequences of her actions. She hadn't just lost the support of her family, she now faced the very real possibility of losing her inheritance. Kristen was held accountable for the first time, without anyone cleaning up her mess. I watched her trembling, glancing around the room as if searching for anyone to come to her defense. But there was only silence, detached stares. No one rushed to comfort her this time. Maybe, just maybe, she finally understood. Actions have consequences, and not everyone will shield you from them. The meeting ended in heavy silence. Everyone knew this family had changed forever. The first week after Grandma's decision passed under a cloud of tension and pressure. Everyone in the family knew there were only 7 days for Kristen to make things right. On days 1 and 2, my father repeatedly called and visited Grandma, trying to persuade her to change her mind. He pleaded and promised he'd better teach Kristen. But Grandma shook her head and said, "All she has to do is apologize. That's it." On day 3, Kristen sat in front of her computer for 3 hours, trying to write an apology email to Jaden. She wrote it, rewrote it, and revised it several times, but in the end, she didn't send it. Deep down, she still didn't feel she had done anything wrong. By day 4, my mother's patience had run out. She looked my father in the eye and said bluntly, "You need to learn how to be a father from the beginning." On day 5, Kristen called me. Her voice was shaky. "Can I see Jaden? I want to talk to him." But when I asked if she genuinely wanted to apologize, she said, "I just want to explain." On day 6, Mark said to me firmly, "If she's only coming to defend herself and not to apologize from the heart, then it's not worth it." On day 7, the final day, Kristen came to our house. She said she wanted to clear up the misunderstanding with Jaden, but still refused to admit she had done anything wrong. When the 7th day passed without a genuine apology, Kristen was officially removed from the will. Grandma followed through with exactly what she had said she would do. Grandma called us 2 weeks after the disastrous birthday party with a surprising offer. She wanted to throw a separate birthday celebration for Jaden. A real party, just for him. The guest list was simple. Just us and Jaden's 5 closest friends, the kids who didn't leave early during the last party and who genuinely cared about my son. Grandma's backyard was transformed entirely with a new theme, Night of Honor. She had spent the entire week preparing, from royal blue banners to carefully crafted paper shields. She ordered a new cake from an upscale bakery in the city, a flawless castle cake with golden icing that read, "Jaden, you matter." The atmosphere was warm and peaceful, exactly what Jaden had always wanted. No yelling, no chaos, just the sound of laughter from kids who truly loved being there. The most touching moment came when Grandma brought out a pale golden retriever puppy with a red ribbon tied around its neck. She looked at Jaden and said, "His name is Milo. Milo will always protect you. He'll never hurt you." Mark was moved to tears watching our son smile. Truly smile. For the first time in 2 weeks, Jaden hugged Grandma tightly and said, "I love you so much." At that moment, I knew this was Jaden's real birthday, a day when he was seen, respected, and loved the way he always should have been. Jaden's transformation after his real birthday was nothing short of remarkable. Before everything happened, my son was shy, afraid of conflict, and often unwilling to speak up. He would always choose silence over facing uncomfortable situations. But it was like something inside him shifted after Milo came into his life. Jaden became noticeably more confident. More importantly, he learned to say no when something felt wrong. I remember one moment in particular when a classmate asked to borrow his favorite Lego set. Jaden politely but firmly said no. At school, he told his friends about his super cool great-grandma, who stood up for him when no one else did. His classmates were amazed when they heard the story of his brave grandmother. What made me proudest was when Jaden decided to join the school's debate club, something he'd never have considered before simply because the thought of speaking in front of others terrified him. Milo and Jaden became inseparable. He spent hours teaching the puppy new tricks and took full responsibility for caring for him. From feeding to walks, Jaden handled it all with care and maturity. One evening, as I watched him playing with Milo in the yard, I turned to Mark and said, "He's a completely different kid now. He knows he deserves to be respected." Mark nodded and squeezed my hand, and I knew then that was the greatest gift Grandma had given Jaden. Not just a puppy, but the confidence to stand tall and the strength to protect himself. While Jaden grew more confident by the day, Kristen's life unraveled. At work, her colleagues began to distance themselves after the video of Grandma smashing my dad's car went viral, and the family scandal became common knowledge. When Kristen walked into the room, conversations around the coffee machine would suddenly fall silent. Her social life wasn't any better. Friends began to question who Kristen was after hearing about what happened. A few of her closest friends asked bluntly, "Why would you do that to a child?" For the first time in her life, Kristen had to face the real consequences of her actions, without anyone shielding her. She finally realized that what she had dismissed as just a joke had caused real harm. Financial pressure soon followed. Kristen had to cover all her expenses: rent, utilities, groceries, the things Dad used to help her with quietly. That's when she began understanding how dependent she'd been on the family. Worse still, even my father started to distance himself from her. Under pressure from my mother, who had made it clear she would no longer tolerate his blind protection, he finally began to pull back. Eventually, after several complaints about her attitude at work, Kristen was required to begin therapy. It was the first time she was forced to confront herself honestly and the toxic behaviors she had refused to acknowledge. The perfect life Kristen once believed she had had completely fallen apart. In the third week after the incident, my father reflected on how deeply he had failed in raising his children. Sleepless nights and the weight of losing his inheritance forced him to face a truth he had long avoided. Sitting beside my mother on the couch one evening, he asked her in a voice full of regret, "Do you think I ruined Kristen?" That question opened a door to painful memories. He recalled the hundreds of times he had protected Kristen growing up, from lying to teachers, when she didn't do her homework to quietly paying off her speeding tickets. Each time he justified it with the belief that a daughter needs to be protected. But now, confronted with the outcome of those choices, he finally saw the damage he had done. After accepting his mistakes, he decided to talk to Kristen and encourage her to offer Jaden a sincere apology. But when he gently suggested she take responsibility for what happened, Kristen lashed out, "Why are you turning your back on me now?" That moment hit him hard. It was the moment he realized he had created a monster, a daughter who couldn't admit fault, who believed she was always right. For the first time in his life, my father chose to stand with his mother instead of defending his child. He picked up the phone, called Grandma, and said, "You were right. I failed Kristen." It was a turning point when he finally chose truth over unquestioning loyalty. One quiet weekend afternoon, while Mark brought Jaden to Grandma's house to play with Milo, Grandma invited me to sit down for a private conversation. It was the first time she opened up to me about her past. We sat together on the bench in the backyard. She looked into the distance, then told me about her childhood. She had to start working as a carpenter at 16 to support herself after her parents passed away. In a world full of men, she had to learn how to stand up for herself and protect her worth in the face of judgment and discrimination. She explained that sometimes people must pick up a hammer to protect what matters, not to hurt or seek revenge, but to build and defend the boundaries that keep self-respect intact. She said those boundaries aren't meant to cause pain. They're meant to protect the dignity of ourselves and those we love. When I asked her about changing the will, she sighed and admitted she regretted letting my father indulge Kristen for so long. She once believed that love alone would teach right from wrong, but real life proved otherwise. She told me she wanted Jaden to grow up knowing he deserves to be loved correctly, not to suffer through disrespect disguised as affection. After that talk, Grandma began teaching Jaden how to build a small bookshelf by hand. He learned to grip a hammer, drive nails, and measure precisely. But I knew it was more than carpentry she was passing down. She was showing him how to build self-respect, understand his worth, and stand tall, knowing he deserves to be treated with care. Grandma wasn't just teaching him to use tools. She was showing him how to build a life rooted in respect. The second month after everything happened, Kristen finally wrote a sincere apology letter following several therapy sessions. It wasn't a rushed email or a short text. It was a handwritten letter, 3 full pages long. In it, she fully admitted she had been wrong. She acknowledged her actions' profound impact on Jaden and promised to work on becoming a better person. Kristen didn't try to justify what she'd done or shift the blame. She took full responsibility for hurting her nephew. She chose to mail the letter instead of delivering it in person, understanding that our family needed space and time. When the letter arrived, we sat down and read it together with Jaden. He listened carefully as I read each line aloud, then thought about it for a while before quietly saying, "I need more time to think." I respected his decision. The letter showed real progress on Kristen's part, but rebuilding trust takes time. Kristen also began volunteering with children at a local community center, learning how to interact with kids healthfully and respectfully. It was a clear sign she was serious about change. As Jaden's next birthday approached, I agreed to let Kristen send him a birthday card, but not attend in person. It was a small step, but a meaningful one. My father and Kristen also had to start rebuilding their relationship, this time on a foundation of mutual respect, not blind protection. It hasn't been easy, but it's necessary for both of them. Healing, like growth, takes time. But now, for the first time in a long while, it feels like we're heading in the right direction. 6 months after everything happened, I shared our story on the Real Family Stories podcast. I wanted to talk about the painful but significant lessons our family had learned. On the podcast, I gave heartfelt thanks to my grandmother, who dared to stand up when the rest of us stayed silent. She taught our entire family the importance of respecting emotional boundaries, especially regarding children. The core message I wanted to share was this: teaching kids how to protect themselves and speak up when mistreated is not optional. It's essential. No one, not even family, has the right to hurt our children under the excuse of just joking. Jaden is no longer the shy, hesitant boy he once was. He's calm, grounded, and knows how to love and be loved healthfully. Most importantly, he understands he deserves respect. Our family, Mark, Jaden, and I, is more united than ever. We have clear boundaries, mutual respect, and a deep sense of protection for one another. We've learned to speak up, not stay silent. On the podcast, I said, "My son has a real hero, and that hero is his great-grandmother." I closed the episode with the image of Jaden sitting in our living room beside Milo, reading a book, confident, safe, and happy in the space we've worked so hard to create for him. As for Kristen, she's still on her healing journey. I've left the door open for reconciliation, but only under one condition. She must respect my son. The final lesson I shared was this: real family isn't about accepting harmful behavior. It's about creating a space where everyone is respected and protected. That's our story: a birthday cake, a brave grandmother, and a lesson in drawing boundaries to protect our loved ones. That's where my story ends. But before I go, I want to leave you with one question. What would you do if someone shoved your child's face into a birthday cake? Would you stay silent because it's family, or would you stand up and protect your child? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. If the story meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more real stories about family and life. Thank you for listening to mine. I'll see you in the following story.